Let's go. Let's go, Vivian. Vivian, all right. So, pode continuar com a pergunta. Desculpa.
All right. So my question was, how you, Miguel, started as a teacher.
So I started a long time ago. I kind of emancipated from my parents' house when I was about 16, and I started to become a missionary. I decided to become a missionary, part of a missionary group, and try to make a difference in the world. I was a very altruistic young dude, and that's what I decided to do. So when I did that, I got into an NGO, and this NGO specifically was very big on education, right? So they would teach children and they would work with education in slums in Rio de Janeiro, specifically Terreirão, right?
Okay.
In Rio dos Bandeirantes. I don't know if you know Rio, more or less.
No, not really.
No?
I
Okay,
just
so,
I've been there twice, but not really. Like I didn't get to know the city very well.
okay, so
Just went
yeah,
there because I used to play sports, so I went there just for sports.
fantastic. Yeah, so that's what I want to hear about too, okay, about your story with the sports and so forth. I'm fascinated about that. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I think that's when I started. I started inside of that NGO with that type of focus, specifically with kids. So I started to learn methodologies to teach children through a methodology called early learning, right? Where
Okay.
you
Right.
expose the children to different activities daily, where they learn vocabulary and they learn
Mm-hmm.
associations to images and sounds, right? Through like
That's
flashcards.
amazing.
And it was really fun. It was really fun. Crazy time, but it really helped me a
So
lot
you
to like
started
focus
with
this.
kids,
I started with kids.
right? And how was that? How was teaching kids?
So exhausting.
Right.
Exhausting for sure. At
It
this,
takes a lot of patience, right?
absolutely, absolutely. It takes a lot of patience, energy, and I guess communication with the parents. That part was super important, you know.
And how was the parents back then?
They were really on board with the program. It was a small program. So we had the children of the volunteers that were part of the program, and we had the children outside of the volunteers that we also had the program where we did like, um, we did entertainment for children. So like clowning, ballooning, this type of
Okay.
stuff, and little shows where we would go to parties. We were hired as an NGO to take care of the children of a
Okay.
party. So we would go there with different activities, different songs, different shows, and all of it had like a foundation in not only entertaining and giving the kids a good time through games and activities, but also through like teaching them somehow, always educationally
Right.
focused somehow.
Uh-huh. And I think that's a great methodology. I have a son, a 6-year-old son, and he loves English classes at school because that's how they teach him. He basically says, and the other students as well, they say that they don't even say they say that English class is their favorite subject at school because they
Nice.
basically play the whole time and they don't
Okay.
even notice that they're learning, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's great for kids. And
I think so too.
nowadays, do you teach kids?
No,
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 right?
no,
Yeah.
not
And I
anymore.
think, yeah, teaching online is, I think it's a little hard.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge challenge. I think children, you definitely need a methodology like TPR or maybe even TPRS, which I really like for children because it involves their full body, it involves them doing the activities, it involves them seeing the result of their communication when they say something to someone and the person does it and they can have immediate feedback loop. I feel that's really engaging for children.
Mm-hmm.
It's very
Definitely.
important to be in place and in person at that for those methodologies. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right. Shall we move on to the,
The questions?
yeah, to the script?
For sure, for sure. Okay, so
Okay.
today I wanted to talk a little bit about feedback. Tell me, do you give feedback? What is feedback to you, and why does it matter in your curriculum.
Right. So I think, yeah, feedback is great, right? Because you got the feedback from the students. You have the feedback from the teachers, right? Teacher giving feedback to the students, and but I think it depends on the student, how the student will take the feedback, like the type of the students. Sometimes some students don't like to be, for example, corrected in front of others. Others don't mind at all. They would rather be corrected like right at the moment instead of like just like not being corrected, right? So when I give feedback, I try to usually I try to talk to them right away. Like as soon as I see, I wait for them. So we have a lot of reading activities because I like them. I always ask them to read the text so I can see how they're pronouncing the words, how they're connecting the words, and I always ask them uh, to sort of like work on their speaking while they're reading, right? Because I feel like that's how I improve my vocabulary a lot by reading. And
Absolutely.
then I take the opportunity to just correct them and work on that. Because I tell them, you know, like accent is not just a matter of beauty. Like it's not just because you want to speak beautifully, right? Like in an American, a Native American, but uh, that will make you improve your listening as well. Because if you
Yeah,
speak similar to them, you will probably like if you know how they connect the words, right? You will probably improve your listening as well.
yeah.
And so yeah, a lot of them just like in the first class they tell me, "Hey, could you please correct me? Like I love being corrected. That's why I'm here." Right? Especially intermediate and advanced levels, because I feel like they come from like they have different experiences they've had before with other professors, and they always tell me like, "Please, I really want to be corrected," you know, because they basically understand everything. They know how to have a conversation. So I try to, and most of my students, I mean, I've never had a situation that they don't like to be corrected. So I like to give them feedback right away. And, you know, something I've been slacking is like asking for feedback,
All
actually.
right.
Because I feel like I'm, you know, disturbing them, I'm bothering them. Like, hey, you know, I've tried to make before like a little survey, you know, to ask
Yeah,
them, like, oh, if you like the classes, what you would change. But then I kind of gave up, you know, I tried to like have the feeling like when we are in class, like I feel like sometimes like they start yawning too much depending on the exercise, you know, because at first since like my classes are very similar to yours, I guess like we have like more speaking time. They come because they want to learn how to speak or they need some opportunity, right?
absolutely.
But then I noticed that although the classes are for them to speak, they don't really like to speak the whole class. You know, they get tired.
Yeah.
So I noticed that they like this kind of like exercises. And so I try to bring stuff that make them think a lot, stuff that they love to guess stuff as well. And so it's got to be something like a little like a combination of stuff that will not make them like fall asleep. It'll make them like engaged into the classes.
Yeah, for
But yeah,
sure.
I
No,
don't know if I
engagement is.
really answered your question about feedback, but yeah.
Well, yeah, from what I understood is that you kind of feel it out and you tried to get feedback in the past, but you kind of got discouraged about it, right? Like you ended up giving
Yeah.
up on doing that, on getting feedback. I think
Hmm.
that's a two-way street, right? When we're talking about feedback, the feedback that students give us, it happens inside of class, but it also happens in their heads and outside of class in the things that they're supposed to do,
Right.
like in their exercises and things like that. And I feel like um, when I give feedback, for example, I try to give feedback almost every class, really, based on what I see that they
Okay.
are having a difficulty with, and the things that they're growing in, right? For example, if I'm giving class to a beginner student and they are going through like A2 difficulties, They're starting to talk a little bit more about their work, starting to talk a little bit more about their backgrounds, maybe talk about the past. And if we're doing a class focusing on talking about the past things that they've done, right, their work, their past experiences, and things like that, I'll definitely start giving them feedback on every one of those classes that is similar, on the things that they used to get wrong and the things that they are getting better. And I'll ask them for feedback on how they are feeling, right? Because I feel
Right.
like the improvement through the levels, it also comes with a feeling of ease. Like, how easy is it for me to do this? So
Mm-hmm.
as a student goes through doing more and more exercises, practicing more, having more conversations with that structure, with that topic, with that context, uh, they will start to feel a degree of boredom, a little progressive degree of boredom that sometimes is because there's nothing very challenging or interesting in the
Right.
topic or in the activity, but it's also sometimes because it has become too easy. Now they do it very easily and very normally, and they haven't tried to add something new to it. They haven't
That's
tried to expand their experience on top of that. So when I'm talking about feedback, I try to give them the feedback on their progress and on how they're dealing with that progress. So if I see them become passive at a certain point, I'll let them know that being proactive is very important. And that I
mm-hmm.
notice that, for example, when they're speaking and they don't know a new word, instead of trying to find that word, they simply ignore and try a different route in a way that they
Right.
can speak. That type of mechanism to keep conversation fluent, it doesn't really help them expand their vocabulary,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they, instead of trying to find that word by, I don't know, getting their phone, like if it was an old day dictionary, try to
Right.
find one there, or ask me by saying something that I like to do is teach the students to pass the ball when they don't know a word. So like
Mm-hmm.
if they don't know the word for
Exactly.
lazy, they'll be like, so I was feeling very on Sunday, I was feeling, they don't know the word, so pass the ball. Do you know when you feel like you just want to relax? You know you have work to do, but you don't have the energy to do it. You just want to chill. You want to sit on the couch, maybe watch TV or Netflix. You know that feeling? What is that feeling? And then I'll give them the word. Is it lazy? Laziness? Do you feel lazy? Right? Do you feel tired? Oh, I think it's lazy. And then they'll find the word by describing the word. You know.
Exactly. That's what I always tell them. Like, if you have a conversation, right, with a native speaker, the person will tell you the word, right? You don't
Hmm.
have to worry about like not knowing. Like, I mean, you don't know the word. Sometimes
Yeah,
you don't even know the word. You've never said it before, so it's okay to ask them, right? Like a normal person would always like help you on that, right?
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So totally, you should do that.
Yeah. So I think that's just a part of the feedback that I give to the student. I'm like, oh, see, that was a good opportunity for you to do passing the ball instead of
Mm-hmm.
dodging the
Right.
obstacle, actually
Mm-hmm.
overcoming the obstacle. And I'll normally give them that feedback whenever I see those different things manifest themselves. So I'll just make them aware. I think that's a super big part of feedback is making the student aware of where he
Yeah.
is, what are his issues, and how to get better.
Mm-hmm. Right. Miguel, and just to fill you in, I don't really nowadays I don't really teach private lessons. So like all
Okay.
my classes are in groups. So
Okay.
like speaking of feedback, uh like I try not to expose them too much. Like if I feel like they're feeling embarrassed the way they
Uh-huh.
talk, and if I'm like correcting them too much, like sometimes you can tell that the person is not feeling very comfortable, like they, since the classes are in small groups, they always like, and they don't really like, they're not friends. and they're just a bunch of people that join the classes. So sometimes when they're especially when they have just joined the classes, they feel a little like embarrassed and not, I wouldn't say embarrassed. They feel like they don't really feel confident because they see that other students are speaking better like than them, because they've been in the group for a while, so they feel more comfortable, right, in making mistakes. So sometimes, like in the very beginning, I try not to like expose them too much, like the way you give them feedback, but sometimes they might feel like discouraged to keep trying, and then yeah, I just like try to get the feeling if the student likes it or not.
I know what you feel. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Have you ever
Hmm.
tried encouraging specific behavior in a group? I remember when I used to give class to a group, and there was one person who, let's say, if the 13 other people in the group had bad habits and they would
Okay.
bring them up all the time in their natural speech or in the way they would approach the questions, I would try to answer if it was posed as a question. Like if their bad habit is, let's say,
Oh,
questioning
I see.
syntax, right? I would answer
Right,
the
right.
question, but if someone had like a positive observation, like, oh, so every time there's an adjective, it's going to come before the noun, you'd be like, absolutely, that's an excellent active observation of your text. Continue to observe actively that you're going to start to notice those patterns more often. And like just really uplifting that behavior in the classroom
Right.
brings a lot of attention from the other students to that behavior too. They're like, a lot of, you'll see like, I don't know, you probably already see this, but like some of the students will reject that. They'll be like, oh, fuck that nerd. Like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
oh,
for
whatever.
sure.
I don't work that way or whatever. And you're going to find others are going to be like, oh, actively observing. Hmm. What other patterns can I find? Right? Because that's
Yeah.
true. Every time there's a noun, there's an adjective before, if there is an adjective. So okay, that makes sense. What other patterns can I find there? And really, grammar and structure is really about pattern recognition. So if one student has like a good observation, uplifting that I always find is a really good and even refreshing thing for a teacher and the classroom to have.
Miguel, are you a parent?
No, no,
You
not
would
yet.
be a great parent.
Oh, well, I don't know, right? I kind of compartmentalize these different things, right? Giving class and having children. Probably one of the reasons why I haven't had children yet,
I mean, yeah, it's not the same when it's your child, but I feel like
possibly.
though, yeah, that way that you try to like correct them, give them feedback would be exactly how you would do like using positive psychology with your kid.
Possibly. And tell me about kids. You got two kids, huh?
Yeah, I got two kids, and that's one of the reasons I don't teach private lessons anymore because I don't
Mhm.
really have any more room in my schedule because of them. But at the same time, it pushed me to do something I've wanted to do for a long time because of them. Nowadays, I only teach group lessons, and I love it. I've realized that it's something that nowadays I feel more comfortable in teaching groups than private lessons. Not that I don't like. Sometimes we have an one-on-one session with the students, like in case like let's say there's a student that has been missing way too many classes, so I call them and I try to schedule in like a quick one-on-one speaking lesson just so you know. So like sometimes since I only teach grown-ups, adults, they are always like sometimes they're busy at work, they have a lot on their plates, and I try to like catch up, like fill them in sometimes. But yeah, anyway.
Hmm. Fantastic. Do you think that that's a challenge that you have more with adults about understanding their reality, that they're going to be busy, that they're not going to be always 100% involved, that their energy is going to be taken in other directions a lot, and that um, you might not be able to expect the amount of engagement that a good student, quote
Right.
unquote, should have inside of the classroom. And how do you deal with that?
Well, actually, you were uh, you were talking about like the how like to like uplift that student and all that. And I was thinking about how like I don't really like. I think I've had like maybe one student that misbehaved in class. All my
Really?
students, yeah, all my students are really like nice. They know how to behave, especially like in an online class. It's different, right, than in-person classes. So they all like behave really well. Also, like talking to a teacher yesterday. She recommended me because she's about to have a child, and she sent me her students to have classes here. And I told her, oh, thank you for these students. They know how to behave online, and and I started to thinking about that, and all my students really like know how to behave in class. I've had one situation that I felt like really embarrassing.
Wait,
It was like
do you want to
awkward.
talk about it?
I
Or
can,
no?
yeah.
Yeah, what happened? I'm curious.
I think this student, I think this student was, I'm not sure, but I felt like they were at the bar. They were at a bar, a pub, and I don't think they were having. I'm not sure, but I feel like they were drunk, and I think like, and then he said something like he made a comment like saying like we were talking about how to give directions, and he was like he basically like invited this girl to go to the hotel with him, but like in
Oh,
a,
really?
I feel, yeah, but it wasn't like in a, like he wasn't like using the class for that. He was like, hey, let's go to the hotel. It's this way, da da da. And then we said something about, like I said, oh, okay, now we're gonna talk about how to give directions at Ibirapuera Park. And then he said something like that I didn't like about what was it? What was the thing that he said, something about like, oh, the this park has too many homosexuals, and then I was like, okay, that's it. But like it wasn't like nice the way he said. And then
Right.
I talked to him the other day, and then I said, hey, like I think it's better. Like I don't think you fit in this type of classes. I think maybe you should have classes like with a private teacher, or maybe like an online course. Something that you don't really have to like too much contact with people. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. He didn't like it, but I don't think it would be good to have this type of student.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's super important, by the way. Like, more power to you. You definitely need to set limits for the behavior of
Yeah,
students inside the classroom. Like, the culture needs to be very clear, you know,
exactly.
and awarding or punishing behavior in the classroom. It sounds like almost like a medieval thing, right? Punishing behavior, but like
Exactly. No,
it's
but
super important.
that wasn't acceptable. And then I talked to the students the next class, and then I told them, hey guys, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but this guy is not here anymore because of this and this and that. And yeah, let's just move on. And then they were like, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
you're
it's
good.
very clear. Very clear. It
Yeah.
makes sense for sure. You know, these
Mhm.
type of things cannot be let. Sorry, like
So,
the culture definitely starts with a teacher.
yeah. I mean, yeah, it was really like awkward when like he said that, and I was like really, you said that?
I'm serious. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
tough.
I was totally caught off guard. And then, anyway, yeah, that was just. But the other, my all the other students are super nice. They know how to like wait for their moment to speak, and they always make like really good questions. Or if they don't feel comfortable, like sometimes they would like message me. Yeah.
Mhm. And how do you feel that's similar or different from your experience in learning the language?
My own experience, yeah. So I try to teach them. Well, the good. I always tell them the good thing is that I struggled in the beginning. You know,
Uh-huh.
like I always tell them that when I took English lessons when I first started, I failed the first semester. Like like when you're learning, hi, my name is Vivian. Like
Uh-huh.
I failed that part. And what else? When I first and then I moved to the U.S. to go to college, and so for this in the first 6 months, it was really hard for me to communicate. So it took me, even like living abroad, I feel like it took me 6 months to start actually speaking, So I tell them, hey, you're taking 1 to 2 like lessons every week here, 1 hour, 1 hour and 30 minutes only, right? So
Absolutely.
don't expect to be like to learn like something that you've never seen before in 1 month, you know maybe there is like if you study hard, like extra outside classroom every day a little, you might speed up things. But like if you like just come to class, to practice, so just to avoid frustration and let them know that things are not gonna like just like happen right away.
Absolutely. Yeah, the
Yeah.
expectations, aligning their expectations with their reality, I feel is a really important part of the learning process.
Right. Yeah. Like you said, right? Like the thing that you mentioned about like being aware of your level, right? I think it's very important.
And aware of the process as well, right? I think this is something that is very ambiguous in the mind of a lot of people that are
Hmm.
looking to learn or who are already learning, which is like, how long is it going to take? And it's really a question of a few things there, right? It's about time, effort, and manner, like the way that you make the effort. And the effort is not always
Right.
studying or practicing, right?
Hmm.
How do you feel are really effective ways or examples of methodologies, techniques, or even students that have progressed quickly because they added these techniques or used these methodologies or made effort in a specific way? What do you
Hmm.
see as like very effective ways that students have used to learn the language?
Right. I see that definitely the students who progress faster are the ones who actually do extra, not just come to class. Because when you work on your own, that's when you have the time to actually think about and try and notice how you are learning, So the students that force themselves to expose to speaking to other people, not just in class, um, were the ones who definitely progressed much faster. The ones who, because I always like make sure they read a lot and work on their listening skills outside classroom, and those are the ones who progress like faster, because
Absolutely.
they have like they take the time to actually like see the language, not just like, because when you are here in class, you know I feel like you're not that you're not learning, of course you're learning, but you're not like with yourself, mindfulness, like
Absolutely.
practicing mindfulness and actually like learning something and like feeling the language, so yeah, those who like expose themselves and try to speak even if they don't understand 100% at the beginning, you know they memorize things much faster, because that's the problem. That's what they always like complain. Oh, I don't know, I don't have vocabulary, I don't have enough vocabulary. Or they always say, oh, I forget things, my mind goes blank. And but then like the ones who are always like exposing themselves, doing what you don't want to do, right? The hardest part. Yeah, those are the ones who definitely progress much faster.
Absolutely,
What
for
about
sure.
your students? What do you think?
I feel that it has a lot to do with uh, that, but I think, and more like first principles, if we're talking about like first principles, I would say that interest and relevance and
Mm-hmm.
obligation are three drivers that really drive progress, right?
Right.
And of course, the compounding investment or the compounding effect is also progress,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I feel that if a person has interest in the language, not only because it's a language, but interest in the culture, interest in people, interest in products from that language. Like
Right,
if a
right.
person really likes J.R.R. Tolkien books, he buys the Lord of the Ring books, he reads those books. I deal with advanced students a lot. So the advanced students that have these habits because they have interest, they listen to English, they read English, they speak English, they talk about these things, they're interested in these things, they're emotionally invested in these things. This keeps the connection to the language very strong, and it keeps them always kind of progressing and practicing. And that keeps their English very fresh and kind of always moving forward, kind of never really deteriorating, you know, always improving. Then you have
Uh-huh.
like the obligation, right? People who, advanced students, for example, in my case, that are obligated to use it at some point daily in their work, for example, in conversations and meetings and emails and things like that. Hopefully, that is not just focused on reading and writing like emails, but like actual interactions, negotiations with clients, and things like that. That kind of obligation also kind of keeps the relationship strong, but it's a different motivation. It's not as pleasurable. It's not something that they would want to do. It's not something where
For sure.
speaking English is something that they like. It's a different motivation. It's not about
Mm-hmm.
interest anymore. It's about obligation. And then you have the progress as a motivator. Progress as a motivator, I feel, is much stronger for like beginners, and it keeps them learning quickly because as soon as they feel that they can do something that they couldn't do before, it's very rewarding. And looking for that constantly, I feel is much more frustrating instead of just doing what works for you and seeing the progress happen and letting that progress be motivating. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It does totally. And I
Mhm.
feel like they are, like you said, if they're actually like interested, right, in the things, in the culture, and they consequently they're more engaged into learning, and they want to learn, right? Because it becomes a priority, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
then yeah, consequently they will learn, right? Because it's something it'll be more natural for them to learn.
Yeah. About motivators, like what have you seen, right? Because I feel there are different motivators for different students. They start English for different reasons. And it's very clear after a while of teaching, like I've been teaching for 16, like 17 years now. And how long have you been teaching for, Vivian?
Mm, I don't really, I've never, since 2000, I always forget, 2012, 12? No,
No, 12. So about 12
12?
years, 12, 13
No,
years.
no. Yeah, I think so. About that. Yeah.
Okay, that's excellent, right? Amazing.
Hmm.
And in all this time, like for sure you see a lot of students starting and stopping in your cycle,
Right.
right? You see a lot of students stopping in the middle. You see a lot of students with recurring difficulties, and it's a minority of students who actually push through the learning process to
Whole
actually
process.
become fluent, right? It's actually a really small amount. It's no
True.
wonder that there are so many English schools in Brazil
Yeah.
and such a small amount of people who actually speak fluently. But in terms of motivations, what are the weakest motivations that you've noticed don't help students when they come and say, I need to learn English because of this. This is my motivator.
Miguel, that's a hard question. I've
Really?
never stopped to think about the hardest, like the worst motivator.
Absolutely.
I mean, I always see that. I always think about the word priority because I feel like the students who never stop. I mean, there are two things that drive them to not stop. Thinking about my students who have been constantly coming to class and have never stopped. Or I mean, sometimes I see that they have a lot uh, like going on at work, so they like miss some classes, but they're always here. Um, or like when they like, let's say they missed 3 weeks of class because they were working on this, I don't know, financial closure or something, and but like they're always like in contact. They're like, teacher, I did some homework here. Like, I'm sorry, I just did like 2 exercises, but I'm here. So I feel like the ones who are like who see that, like they have that in their habit. So habit is something that I think like get them going and never stopping. So they're like already used to like having like contact with the language every week,
Mm-hmm.
at least once a week. And then the ones who uh yeah, so like habit, the ones who are the priority, like if it's a priority in their case, right, in their lives,
Mm-hmm.
they will come.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I don't know, but I can't think of like the
Like
worst.
a bad motivator.
Yeah. What do
Oh,
you think, Miguel? You tell
I
me.
I think that some of the worst motivators are because of my job and I don't like my job. Like
Oh yeah.
I feel like when a person has a bad connection to their work and the reason they're doing English is their work, that's the absolute worst motivator in every single situation. It's the one that requires an amount of grit from the student to actually pull through that is so rare that most of them actually quit.
Yeah, because they hate it so bad. And
Yeah, it's
so
like twice as hateful because it's
because yeah,
a job they don't like and a thing they don't have time for, which is
and
studying English.
they're doing that because of the job, because the job requires, right?
Yeah. And then they're
Yeah.
looking for another job. So as soon as they find another job, as soon as they find another job that doesn't require English, they'll immediately move to there and they'll start slacking off in the English. Or they'll want to move from the job, but they find that the only way that they can progress in their career is if they know English and they hate their job and they don't have time for English. So it becomes a perfect storm of frustration at that
Right.
point where they can't move forward in their career because they're missing something crucial,
Yeah.
and that thing that is crucial is emotionally negatively connected to their work. So it's like they need to really either change the relationship with the learning that language, like do it for a different reason, look at it in a different light, or do different activities that will associate practicing that language with something light and progressive,
Hmm.
or find a different moment that will not waste so much energy, I think time and money, because I feel that when students start classes for a job that they hate, without enough time for classes, they end up giving up not very far down the line, and that ends up being a waste of time and money.
Yeah. And then yeah, because they don't really learn like anything, right? Because they keep like they have that hateful like feeling in their hearts, right? And then it becomes a snowball, like you said. Like they hate their lives, they hate their job, they hate everything, right? They hate learning English because they have to, because their job tell them that they have to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course there are others. Like I've seen other situations where I've been teaching really high-end students, like they're CEOs or owners of their companies, and it's a really big company, and they do a lot of things. And when they come to English class, it just reminds them how basic they are at that
Right.
skill. and that's
Okay.
really difficult sometimes for them to deal with. Um, which I thought
And
was a really interesting, a different experience as a teacher. Sorry.
right. No, you said like you've had like C-level students that like their English level weren't that high.
It wasn't very high at all.
Okay.
They were actually beginners, but
Mm-hmm.
advanced in in every other part of their life. They make a lot of
Right.
money, they have a lot of business, and they they know that in order for them to make business in other countries at this point, they need to learn English.
In
And
but I have so many questions for
please go
this
ahead.
type of student. So this person, right? I
Uh-huh.
see that this person doesn't have too much time in their
Right.
schedule. Do
Well,
they?
they have time in their schedule, but they have other priorities.
Right. So, and that's a student that would probably take like at least one, like three classes a week.
Well, as many as they can, because
Right.
again,
Yeah.
it seems to be that with students of this profile, it's very difficult for them to accept corrections. I
Yeah.
feel
Uh-huh.
just accept the realization of how basic they are at this, like how beginner they are,
Mm-hmm.
and it generates an amount of impatience and anxiety
Exactly.
with progress because
That.
it's again another kind of perfect storm where they also can't invest enough time outside of class um, to do the exercises, to do the exposure, to take the time to practice. So at every class, they are almost going 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. They go
Yeah.
two
How do
steps
you
forwards
handle
in
that?
class. I'm sorry?
How do you handle that kind of student? Like,
You have
how
to
do
tell them.
you?
I like to let them know. I like to let them know, almost like disclaimers, right?
Okay.
Like, okay, if you're not doing your exercises outside of class, we can't measure your progress in class. What we're
Right.
going to be doing is pretty much giving continuity to where you stopped in the class before. We won't be giving continuity to the skills that you're probably improving in the time between the last class and this one. I won't be able to give you new feedback on top of what maybe you tried. I won't be able to answer a question. A lot of questions happen when you use the language and the teacher's not around. So I won't be able to answer any questions of any difficulty that you might have faced. You know, you'll have no new events that bring novelty to your learning, that bring new vocabulary, new difficulties, new situations, you know? You'll have none of that. So you're really just prolonging the learning process and you're making it very uneventful, focusing only on the class times. So if you want to change that, I
Uh-huh.
always tell the student, I would suggest that you start practicing it outside of class and bringing the situations that you have difficulty inside the class so that we can approach them.
Oh,
You know,
that's a perfect. Uh-huh.
you
That's
know,
a really good way to motivate them, right?
that's one of the ways that I try, but that's the game, right?
Yeah. Do they see you as as someone like who's telling them what to do in a
It's
bad
my
way?
job. No, I always tell them that I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell them this
Right. Okay.
because that's the reality. Like the reality of the student is what needs to be worked with, in my opinion. You need to work with the reality.
Yeah,
What are
for
the
sure.
student's flaws? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And have them aware of that. Show
Yeah.
them the way to get better than that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
If you're not working with their reality, then it's really tough to actually learn.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Right. And how long that does that kind of student last?
Very little. I would say the max life cycle for a student like that is about 4 months.
Mm-hmm. I can see that.
if they
Yeah.
don't change, right? I've had other
Mm-hmm.
situations of students where like they've had negative relationships with the language. Like I had a student that lived abroad. She lived in London, and she was
Yes.
working in a kitchen, and she needed to learn English in order to work in the kitchen.
Yeah.
But she didn't like the job. She hated the
Right.
people in the kitchen.
Uh-huh.
She hated all the work. That situation that we were talking about before.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And she started to learn English, but she started to look for a different job. At the moment she started looking for a different job, she started thinking about stopping English classes because she probably wouldn't need it in this new place where maybe more Brazilians were, and other Brazilians were working, so probably they would speak more Portuguese and things like that. Um, and I said, listen, I understand that it's much more comfortable moving to a job that doesn't require
Mm-hmm.
English,
Yeah.
you know, but the reality is that you have a lot of potential to speak English easily, but the negative association of having to use or learn English for your current job is definitely bugging you down. Every time you don't even want to talk to these people, you don't even want to interact with them. You actually want to get in and get out without saying anything and just doing your fucking job,
Yeah.
you
I mean,
know?
sooner or later, she would have to talk.
And that is very, I don't know, I guess it's a very heavy um, weight to add to the learning process, which is already difficult. The
Yeah.
learning process isn't a bed of roses. It's not super
Uh-huh.
easy, and I
Yeah.
feel um, that needs to be said. So when I told her that, I said maybe try another job, look for another job, but another one that also has you speaking English, right? And she was,
Miguel,
"Hmm,
you're not just a teacher.
what do you mean?
You're a therapist.
No, that's what teachers do with the learning process, right, Vivian?
Yeah, yeah. But I mean,
Right?
it's really good, right? I have a lot of students that they say that like sometimes I come to class and I feel much more relieved because I feel like this is a therapy for me because
Yeah,
they speak about their problems, right? And then I
yeah.
say, yeah, it's therapy in English, right?
Yeah, that happens too. Speaking about problems inside of the English class is a good level to look for. You can finally talk about your problems inside of the English class. You're probably at B1, B2 level. You can probably deal with
Yeah,
a lot of stuff, travel and all that stuff. So if you get to that level, uh, it's a feedback that you can give them. If you're talking
right.
about your problems, you can travel, you can do your stuff, you can do a lot of things.
For sure. Yeah,
But that's
right.
pretty much it. So I wanted to ask you also, like, you were an athlete. You were an athlete when you were younger,
Yeah, I was. Uh-huh.
right? Do you see any parallels between being an athlete and in the world of competitive sports and learning a language?
Um, I mean, I think being an athlete helped me to like push through things, deal with people, and as a teacher, you have to know how to handle people very well. And I think that helped me a lot because I used to play team sports, and yeah, definitely. And I think, I mean, just like the contact with with my friends, my teammates helped me a lot as well. I know, like it's not that it has a relationship to the language, but at the same time, it does because they were actually my teachers. They were the ones who taught me how to speak like daily conversation, how like I remember like there was this situation, this scene. I still have it in my mind, like as if it were today. We were in the middle of the game, and then I would call a play, and then this my friends would all like start like laughing at me, and I'll be like, "What? Why are you laughing?" And they're like, "You don't say." I would say, "Watch the still," and but instead I was supposed to say, "Watch the steal," but I would say still, and I would be like, "What's the difference?" and they would say, it's not still, it's still. And I'll be like, I don't see any difference. So they were the ones who taught me like how to like actually speak better. Like, because my teachers wouldn't really correct me, you know,
Interesting.
at that level. Or something like I'd call them. So I had this friend, Katie Dutton, like, and then I would say Katie Dutton, and then she'd be like, "It's not
Dutton.
Dutton, it's Dutton." And I'll be like,
Dutton.
"What's the difference?" She's like, "Not Dutton, it's Dutton." And I'll be like, "I don't see any difference." And then like after a long time, they were the ones who like actually taught me like how to speak better. Or like I remember like saying ear and ear, and then they'd be like, and then I'll be like, there's no difference. I don't see any difference. They'd be like, there is a difference. Yeah.
Yes,
So like just
absolutely.
yeah,
Phonetic
having like my
awareness.
teammates like making fun of me, correcting me all the time. Or like sometimes I'd have like an assignment at school, and then they'll like I would like read the text for them, like the essay, and they'll be like, then they just like start laughing at my essays and be like, why are you saying that in your essay? That's not how we say it. Like the culture that you were talking about, you know, that's not how we say it in English. And I'd be like, but I mean, I'm just translating it. They'd be like, yeah, but that's not how you say it in English, right? Like there is
Absolutely.
a difference, like in culture, right?
Absolutely.
The way you say
Absolutely.
some stuff. Yeah. But
No,
yeah, it was
absolutely.
good because of that, because of my teammates, I think. And so I had this barrier, right? This obstacle that I had to face, which was like communicating in the middle of the game, you know. And so I had like I lived in Tennessee, and so I lived in Miami for 2 years. So Miami was basically like I've learned like more Spanish than English when I lived in Miami. Then I moved to Tennessee. It was like a whole different world. And then I remember like my coach like telling me, asking me, like he'd be like, Vivian, are you speaking English? And I would say, yes, I'm trying, you know. And he'd be like, I can't understand you. And then I'll be like, I can't understand you either because your accent is very different, you know. And also there was this like situation where the first week we were in Miami, like the in team sports you have to communicate a lot, right?
Oh, absolutely.
In my the other Brazilian, like when I moved there, I knew how to like speak a little, not just fluently, but I had some like vocabulary. And she like the only English that she had was from school, right? So she basically just knew verb to be. And I remember like at the end of the practice in our first week, she just like sat in the middle of the field, started like crying, and then the coach approached to her and asked her what's going on. She'd be like, I can't talk, you know, it's really hard for me to communicate because in Brazil, like I'm very like talkative in the field, and here I'm not able to speak, and it's very frustrating. So she like you said, like she had to force herself to learn how to speak because of the sport that she loved.
Yeah.
So when you said like the worst motivator is like having a job that you hate and having to learn English. So she that made her learn how to speak fast because she loved what she was doing, right? The love for the sport.
And that makes
So
such a
yeah,
difference. It makes such a big difference. Made me think a lot about um, connecting something that you love. I think that's something that's super underrated with learning a
yeah,
language, which is find something that you like in that language. What do you like? What do you like doing? What do you enjoy doing? Right? What do you
yeah,
enjoy about other cultures? What can you learn? Right? I think one super interesting way to learn a language is by like doing different activities that are taught to you by people that speak that language, like
yeah.
making a specific dish from that area, from that country, right?
Right.
Making some type
If
of
you like to
dish and
cook.
watching them do it. You like to cook? Go
Mm-hmm.
doing that, you know, do some
Trying
cooking,
to
do some cooking
connect,
with that.
right, with
Yeah.
something.
Follow someone who cooks on Instagram, you know,
Yeah.
Just
Uh-huh.
watch their recipes, watch what they say, watch the things they do. Oh, but I'm only going to learn English in that context. No, you're going to learn a lot of English, but most of it from that context, right? And find things that you like doing. I think that's super important, exploring that thing. And while you explore that, learn what works for you. Like,
For
how
sure.
do you consume that
That's the
information?
thing. Finding
Yeah.
something that works for you, right?
Yeah.
What about you, Miguel? Your relationship with sports and the
Well,
language?
fuck. For me, it's actually really. All right, hold on. Uh,
Right. No problem.
relationship language. So, jiu-jitsu was a thing that I started doing because I needed to reconnect with the student's process, right?
Mm-hmm.
I started to find myself extremely impatient with some of the students' mistakes. I started to think about some concepts and structures in English as obvious. And as teachers, we can never think of anything in the learning process as obvious. Students who are learning, nothing is obvious. Everything's kind of like a discovery. Everything's like a part of a journey that they're kind of going through, kind of blind in the beginning. And little by little, they start to see where they can put their foot, where in fact they have a good base, and they start to understand, you know, they start to understand and navigate the language and their difficulties in a much more conscious and conscientious way further down the line. But I had completely disconnected from this process, so I started to lose a little bit of patience, and I started to see that that was something super negative as a teacher. So I decided to go into jujitsu because it was something that I was always interested in, only watched a lot, and at that time it was after the pandemic. So I had also gained a lot of weight because I had stayed a lot of time at home, and
Right.
that was really bothering me. So I said, okay,
Right.
let's kill a few birds with the same stone. And then I'll lose weight, I'll get closer to the student's process, and I'll be doing something that I'm really interested in. And I'm not going to be the person who just watches the stuff that I'm interested in. I'm going to be doing it. You know, one of my biggest nightmares is to become that guy that just sits in the bar and screams at the television screen at the soccer game because he loves soccer, but he doesn't play any soccer. He drinks and does all this stuff, and he never is involved with the thing that he loves.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one reason why I also got involved in it. And from that time on, I started to really feel, the impacts of being a complete beginner. The discomfort that it is, the anxiety that it is, the
Yeah.
the in the, the unknown that is so big. You know, every time I stepped on the mat, uh, it was a new experience, and it changed with time. I remember the first time that I stepped on the mat, a jiu-jitsu mat, I was super uncomfortable with the kimono, with the
Okay.
gi.
Uh-huh.
It was, we don't wear this clothes on a regular basis. I looked at other
Right.
people so comfortable inside of it, and I was like, okay, one day I'll feel that comfortable for sure. But fuck,
Yeah.
this is uncomfortable. My belly was huge, so it was difficult to
Yeah.
bend my body, move my body. That was super uncomfortable. Um, Not knowing the culture of the mat. So there's a culture at the jiu-jitsu where you're you can go in and you're going to say hi. You're going to shake the hand of everybody who's on the mat.
Oh yeah.
Different cultures, different gyms have different culture, but I guess older school gyms, they have this idea of respecting everyone. So you go in,
I see.
you bow before you go in, you shake the professor's hand, and you shake everybody else's hand, you know,
Right.
just as a respect thing, as a cultural thing. And I didn't know that in the beginning. I had no idea about that in the beginning. I didn't know about the concept of respecting the mat space, going onto the
Mm-hmm.
mat already with your gi on, not putting your gi on while you're in the mat, especially in the beginning,
Oh yeah.
and greeting everybody was. I guess, the first part of getting into this new world of learning. And I feel that a student who has never learned another language, who has never been in an English class or a language class, when he goes in for the first time, he has maybe today an idea of what to expect, but it's always a new learning experience every time. And there are a lot of things to get used to. So I kind of felt the same thing inside of jiu-jitsu, and it really brought me closer to the students, really made me empathize with them much more genuinely, understand that, yeah, the same lack of knowing
Mm-hmm.
that I
For sure.
feel in jiu-jitsu, the same type of unconscious incompetence that I have in jiu-jitsu, this student who is just getting into the classes now is going through. So great. Now, not only do I know how he is and I have a similar idea of how he feels, I can also
Right.
help him go through his difficulties because I'm going through it as well in other places. And it kind of brings me back to the learning journey. And it
Right.
really makes me get back to that relationship um, of the learning process of the student.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I kind of reconnect with the students with that, and how sports, at least this sport, because jujitsu
Uh-huh.
is a individual sport, like it's something that you perform on your own,
Right.
but you can only develop it with other people, similar to
Oh, yeah.
language, similar to
Great
language.
point.
You know,
Uh-huh.
it's something that you yourself are getting better at, but you need someone else to practice with you in order for you
Right.
to get better. You know,
What about in terms of comparison?
like
Would you like,
comparing to other students.
yeah, like did that help? Like, would you compare yourself to other people at jujitsu, like when you first started, or not really?
Absolutely.
You were aware of
Absolutely.
your level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I got there, the first day, there was this girl. Her name was Anna, and she destroyed me. She was like maybe 20 kilos lighter than me, 25
Right.
kilos lighter, and just much more petite, but she destroyed me. Absolutely
Right.
destroyed me. And I would look at that and I was like, wow, that is fascinating. That
Mm-hmm.
girl is so much more advanced than me. That girl is at a level that I have no idea. And she wasn't at a super high level. She was a blue belt. I was a white belt. She was right above
Right.
me.
But compared to
But
you, like,
compared to me, there was such a gap between our skills that I couldn't even imagine. Like she became like my reference. I
getting
was like,
bigger.
fuck, that
Oh,
right
so
there is something that I should try to be at some point. How I'm gonna do that, I have no idea. All I knew is that I had to come back the next day.
so she actually, like, seeing her fighting with her, like, actually motivated you to get there, or
Um,
did that
yeah.
ever make you feel bad?
No, 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 no. What makes me feel bad is when I see that I'm not doing what I normally do to make progress. To give a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of context on that, I feel that students need to understand and set the pace for their progress. So they
Mm-hmm.
need to know how much frequency, how much content, how much they can do, and how much that they need to do in order to see a difference in a month,
Mm-hmm.
in order to see a tangible difference between 2 months in 2 months. So,
Right.
like, some students will be very comfortable with just coming to class once or twice a week, but they'll only do this.
Right.
And when they do this, from what I've noticed, is that they don't really have a very significant improvement month after month. It's small improvements, but not really significant ones that they, in fact, feel like tangible
Mm-hmm.
improvements.
Right.
And that's a pace. That's a pace that they've set for their language learning.
Right.
And I feel that every student needs to find their pace and set their pace, So in the very beginning, I think they need to try with the highest amount of time that they can invest, whatever that is. If it's 1 hour every day, 5 times a week, 6 times a week, 7 times a week, if it's twice a week, 1 hour every time,
As long as they don't stop, right?
as long as they find the pace, find their pace of learning.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Yeah, it does.
like after a student studies for 5 times a week, 1 hour every day, he will feel a big difference if the next month or the next 2 months he can only do twice a week. He will see a
Mm-hmm.
really big gap in how much he learned on both times. He will see
Right.
a really big gap in that. And adjusting that to his reality, like realistically thinking, I can't do 5 times anymore, but I can do 4. I can do
Mm-hmm.
3. I won't have the
Right.
same amount of progress, but I'll have a similar or closer amount. And then they can adjust that to find like a sweet spot that is acceptable to them in terms of the progress that they're having, and that's acceptable to them, uh, and meets their expectations for what
Mm-hmm.
kind of progress they want to have in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you
Yeah.
know, and then kind of tweak that. If they see that
Mm-hmm.
2 times a week is really slow, they try 3 times a week. And I'm
Right.
not saying that they need to try 3 classes. I'm saying that they need to try practicing 3 times. If it's with me or if it's with other students, if it's with me or if it's with other people, if it's
Exactly.
with me or if it's with a book that they like, if it's with me or
Mm-hmm.
if it's with content that they like to consume. Doing it once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times every week is going to have a big impact, a big difference in the impact of their learning, and them finding that pace, finding what is the pace that they're comfortable with, I think is a super important part of the beginning learning. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what I also connected to when I compared myself to this girl. I was like, fuck, okay, this is a really cool level to try to get to. Um, she's not a black belt, she's not like the most advanced, but I think it's a good start.
So
So I'm
you
gonna,
had a realistic expectation, right?
well, yeah, like I knew that
Mhm.
if I came every day, that would be more beneficial. So I started 3 times a week, and then I went to going 5 times a week. And I feel I did that entire year 5 times a week. And that
Wow.
had such an increase in my skills that it really showed, um, in the competitions that I would do, etc. You know, I think that's also really an important part. I think the testing part is super important, right? Like putting yourself through the test of actually practicing in real life the thing that you're theoretically learning in class, right? And in real life, interacting with people. In my case, in jiu-jitsu, actually going to competitions, the
Mhm.
worlds, the Brasileiro, like all of the different competitions that we're going to have.
Right.
Um, put myself through that fire just to, definitely test, I think is a big deal. It's a big part of it for sure.
And what color belt are you today, Miguel?
I'm a blue belt. I'm still a blue belt.
Oh, there you go. You
Yeah.
got there,
Yeah, I'll get
right?
there. And that's the other thing, right? Like looking at it as a long term, almost eternal process. Because also, like learning language, like there's never a limit to how good you can get at a skill. You know,
Yeah.
the difference is that you're making smaller increments when you're advanced in details, and much bigger increments when you're a beginner in like very obvious big things like structure and new words and things like that. When you're in
Hmm.
advanced, it's more about nuance, it's more about experience, it's more about context, it's more about little shades of meaning that you start to understand better. And these little things are the progress of an advanced person. But the limit of progress is, in my opinion, super unlimited. So when a student starts off the learning progress already thinking about it as a thing that is unlimited is a much better mentality, and
Right.
accepting that is much better, because then the student
Hmm.
never keeps thinking, when am I going to be advanced? When am I going to get this? Like, when am I going to get the black belt? When am I going to be advanced? When am I going to be this? When am I going to be fluent? What is fluent? When am I going to be fluent?
Yeah,
You know what I
I
mean?
mean, cause you get like it may like make you feel a little anxious about it, right?
Yeah.
About the learning
Anxious,
process.
expectations become really high. It's like, I want to be advanced. When am I going to be advanced? That goes back
Hmm.
to the topic of pace. Okay, what's your
Yeah.
pace?
I, I've realized that the word fluent scares a lot of people.
Fluent?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I feel like a lot of them like they say like, oh, uh, I don't know. Like they've told me before that the word fluent makes them feel like anxious about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because in their heads, like fluency is like that person who speaks like you, that person who speaks like a native, you know?
Yeah, that's such a misconception, I feel. Like,
Exactly.
such a misconception. There are people who don't have perfect accent. The accent actually has very little to do with fluency, right?
Yeah,
In my opinion, I feel that accent needs to be corrected only if it hinders people understanding what you're saying. And
for sure.
it definitely is a good part in building phonetic awareness, where, like you
Hmm.
said, you understand the difference between still, you know,
Hmm.
these little differences in phonetic awareness, they come with practicing your pronunciation for sure, listening and
Yeah.
speaking, and there are methods and techniques to improve that. But I feel that pronunciation is definitely something that should be improved if it hinders communication.
Hmm.
If it doesn't hinder
Totally.
communication, if you can continue to, communicate normally and naturally, works out
Right.
just fine.
Hmm. Yeah. Agree. Right. What about we were talking about
We were talking about feedback a while back. Yeah. Now
mm-hmm,
we talked about so many things. We talked about pronunciation. We talked about passing the ball when we don't know vocabulary. We talked about setting the limits for behavior. Right. We
mm-hmm,
talked a little bit about that, about drawing the
yeah,
line of how a student should behave inside the class and about the culture of the classroom. We talked about the learning experience as a teacher and a student, characteristics of students who learn quickly. We talked a lot about that. We talked about the worst motivators for students.
yeah,
We talked
mm-hmm,
about parallels between learning a language and being an athlete, or your experiences with learning a language while being an athlete. Sorry.
yeah,
The difficulty of finding something that works for you and your relationship with the language. We talked about that. Reconnecting with students, comparing yourself, and now about how the word fluent scares a lot of people. That's really interesting. Like, the goal of speaking should be to communicate.
right,
And I feel some students lose sight of that at some point. And they don't
mm-hmm,
see it as something like, oh, I need to communicate. It's, I need to speak correctly. I need to speak like this guy or like that guy or like this person. And when I do that, when I can do that, I will be quote unquote fluent.
and
It's such a
Miguel, do you
misconception.
think that's a Brazilian thing?
I don't know. I haven't been teaching language in other places since I was in Brazil, but
Mm-hmm,
I do feel that there's a very uh, there are some things about Brazilian culture. This is where we're going to start to get into the controversial aspect of the podcast. But yeah, I feel there are some things about Brazilian culture that are not exactly. good for learning culture in general. I feel one of them is like, I should know, you know, you should know because you went to school. I know because I went to school. There's this kind of concept of like, I studied for this, so I know. I studied,
Right.
so I'm an authority. And
Mhm.
when it comes to bringing this into the reality of learning, it really hinders learning because
Mhm.
people feel they only are if they know. And simultaneously, not knowing becomes absurd. Wait, you don't know?
Right.
You don't know this word? You don't know this term? You don't know how to say this? You don't know that? You know? And that foments a fear of people not trying to risk things, not letting someone else know, hey, what word is that? Sorry, that's a new word for me. What is that? You know, like
Yeah.
just that question becomes inhibited. And that question, the simple question of asking, I'm sorry, what is that? Is such a useful way to learn new vocabulary on a daily basis. But for that to happen, this culture of like, you should know needs to be eliminated because it becomes an individual mind voice, mental voice, which is like, you should know that because you're intermediate. Don't ask that question. You're going to look stupid. You know? And I
Yeah.
think that is a part of Brazilian culture that I feel is maybe it's Sao Paulo culture. I don't know that I feel
Yeah.
is super
Maybe.
hindering.
Never thought about that. Uh
You
huh.
know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that we have that ego thing, right? Like, I don't know, cause I never like, I see like Brazilians. Yeah, cause I have more contact here in São Paulo, right? So I feel like people are too worried about like the way they speak, the way they pronounce words, the way. And I always tell my students, it's not. Of course, you should try to speak uh, like a native, but not because it looks pretty, not because of aesthetics, but because of by learning how to speak like them, you're gonna improve your listening. But like I feel like people here focus too much on like looking like sounding like a native. I don't know why, but because if not, they don't consider you fluent because if you don't speak like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I have my theories why, but it's
You
all just
do?
speculation. Absolutely.
What do you think?
I feel like there has been a movement for many, many years, I think even generations in Brazil, where the United States has been kind of put on a pedestal culturally, you know?
It, yeah,
You
it
know, it
is.
has been
Uh huh.
culturally put on a pedestal in Brazil. And I
Uh huh.
feel that that has affected the language learning environment a lot
Yeah.
in a few negative
Mm,
ways.
I like your theory.
You know, I feel that
Hmm.
the culture of the U.S. is not known deep enough. I feel I'm not going into controversial topics again, but like I feel like there is a discrepancy between the reality of the U.S. and the fantasy that a lot of Brazilians create of the U.S. I don't know
Sure.
how it is in other places, but I feel in Sao Paulo there is a really big fascination with like the big cities of the US, like New
Yeah.
York, and the big attractions of the US, like Disney,
Totally.
to the point that people have dreams about visiting an amusement park.
Yeah.
Like I
Uh huh.
dream about going to Disney World. And for me as a person who was kind of raised in American culture and has always been I've always had my finger on the pulse of what's going on in the U.S. What are the political movements of the U.S.? What's the culture like? What are the subcultures that exist in the U.S. Just so I can really understand it much more deeply as an advanced
Mm-hmm.
speaker. That's kind of what I have to do so that I can
Mm-hmm.
understand a lot of the different contexts fluently. I've started to notice that like they are as imperfect as a lot of other places, and understanding that I feel helps us
Right.
humanize the reality of what it is to speak that language. You can speak that language in so many different levels, just like we speak Portuguese here on so many different levels. And
Mm-hmm.
there is not one standard that will be the fluent standard. Do you know what I mean? There
Yeah.
is my standard, the standard
Mm-hmm.
that I want for myself. And that's normally going to come with the people that I hold as a good standard. Let's say if I want to speak, like, I don't know, a specific show host, whoever that might be,
Right.
that person's going to become my standard. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if I want to speak
Yeah.
like the people that I listen to in my rap music, that's going to become my standard.
For
And I'll
sure.
speak like that, you know, and I'll learn how to speak in that direction. And really, setting your own standard, I think, is a super important thing for students to understand that it's important. Who is your standard? It's not
Mm-hmm.
the general American idea of Brazilians' perspective that is the standard, you know? And I feel
Mm-hmm.
that in different contexts here in Sao Paulo, there are different standards.
Right.
Like in the corporate context, you'll have a standard of speaking like they do in the corporate America.
Right.
It's not about speaking English, it's about speaking corporate English.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like talking about challenges instead of difficulties, talking about um,
Just using like fancy
shifting
words.
approaches instead of deciding to do something completely different,
Yeah.
and using kind of technical, evasive, non-confrontational language becomes, or technical, corporate, non-confrontational language becomes kind of the standard, and that's another standard. So I
Yes.
guess every individual should find their standard for themselves and should kind of separate what the standard for the culture that's around them is and what their standard is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Totally. Uh-huh. I'm just like here
Oh,
thinking about it. Like, like it makes total sense, right? Mm-hmm.
I feel that's super interesting. And I feel it changes, right, in different areas around Sao Paulo, right? We have Pinheiros, like I live in Pinheiros, between Pinheiros and
Okay.
Vila Madalena. And here, like I don't necessarily look like a person who speaks English at all, and I don't even really look like the basic, um, like the general population from here. So whenever I speak English, it becomes a really big shock. You can immediately see people kind of shocked, you know,
What do you
and
mean? Like, what do
shocked.
people expect? No,
I don't
like,
know. I
yeah,
don't know
but
what
like,
they expect, but I always find a very big shock. And I find that it helps me really connect with people um, who have modern American as their standard. And at the same time, it gives me a lot of exposure to people who speak English on different standards in different
hmm
ways, with a more
right.
Brazilian, British, American accent, approach, or even culture, you know. And I feel that here, different from like Behini or Faria Lima, where it's much more like a corporate approach to like
hmm
English, where it's
Yeah.
mostly used. Here you'll have a much more like diverse group of professionals that will each kind of have a different, I guess, upbringing with the language, a different experience with the language, a more real life based experience with the language. Like they travel to a place and I don't know, they go snowboarding with someone and they connect with a person who snowboards and they become a person that they talk to and they start to get that kind of vocabulary, that kind of interaction. So it definitely generates different types of connections, you know.
Yeah.
And I
Mm-hmm.
feel that goes back to the idea of setting your standard. Like, if my standard is the corporate standard, I'm going to kind of incorporate that culture. And that culture
Mm-hmm.
has a lot of like judgment, you know. The person
Right.
doesn't know this term, or what did they just say, making fun of their
Yeah.
presentation because they said this and not that. You know, there's a competitive nature in the corporate world that sometimes gets and English gets lumped into that competition where they're now competing over who has better accents and who has better vocabulary
Right.
and who says things in a more complex way, you know. And
Yeah. Uh-huh.
in places like this, I guess, where people learn it by living experiences. I don't know. I could be biased, but I think it makes a big
No,
difference.
but I think it makes sense. Yeah,
You
it
know what I
is
mean?
totally like that.
But yeah, but that's the game, right? So
Yeah.
who is your reference, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
Vivian, I would love to talk to you for more time. Maybe we can set up another one where we talk more about different topics. But today we talked about a lot of stuff about
Yeah,
fluency, about the culture, about references, about phonetic awareness, parallels between learning language and an athlete, like all of these different things. I think they're super nice, important conversations to have, you know. And I would love to have another conversation with you.
for sure.
But for today, why don't you let people where they can find let people know where they can find you? Tell them anything
Mm-hmm.
about
Okay.
yourself that you would like
Um,
to say, and feel free. The floor is yours.
right. You can find me on Instagram at teacher Vivian Morimoto,
Hmm.
and that's pretty much it. Because I'm more on Instagram, and
Hmm.
that's where I post my tips, my English tips, and yeah, if you'd like to DM me, I'd be glad to talk to you.
All right. And what kind of students do you work with?
Uh, all levels from beginner, elementary to pre-advanced level, and we focus more on group conversations and yeah, adults. Okay, usually the classes are at night. Just the pre-advanced level group. There is another group in the morning, but the other groups are happen all at nighttime.
Okay, amazing. All right, fantastic. All right, Vivian. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been such a nice conversation. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
accepting. It was
Miguel.
amazing. All right,
I love talking to you.
amazing for you
Yeah.
too. Big kiss.
All right.